Welcome to Everyday Ethics. We're going to continue our discussion from yesterday. Today, the focus will be on criminal rehabilitation. Remember, everyone, that we have super stickers, we have super chats, and those super stickers and super chats are very, very appreciated. So, Brent McCall and I, in our book, Down the Rabbit Hole, How the Culture of Corrections Encourages Crime, summarized the doctor's framework, Doctors Samenow and Yokelson. And we did it with 6 bullet points. 1, the inviolability of choice. 2, reason over emotion. 3, inculcating a healthy sense of guilt. 4, confronting misbehaviors and thinking errors. 5, repetitiousness. And 6, clarifying self-interest. Yes, Danny, it does help to pay for the $20 coffees that we go and get. So the first thing we're going to focus on is the inviolability of choice. So what we mean by this principle here is that we all have choices. So even if criminals grow up in poverty or in abusive homes or in crime-ridden neighborhoods, there is still they still have the capacity to choose different. So in other words, when we say inviolability of choice, what we mean is that, let me go over here for a second. What we mean is ultimately that criminals are responsible for the decisions that they make. Nothing changes that. I shouldn't say nothing. I'm not going to put it in perspective. If you have somebody whose mind has been completely destroyed and has been completely brainwashed, or is unable to function as an adult, but the overwhelming majority of people on the planet, of criminals in general, have the ability to make choices. We can choose different. We can try to be better. And that is, that's a message that the doctors were at pains. Okay. We're at pains to convey to people and to the criminals in their program. See, today we're talking about criminal rehabilitation. So we're talking about what works in the context of programming. I'm always told, well, not everybody understands this. So in prison, they have various rehabilitative programs. And most of them suck, to be perfectly clear with you. But ever so often, there are some good ones. And the doctors have one of those good ones. And one of the things that they go over and want to convey to the criminals in their programs over and over again is that their choices are their responsibility. By the way, I hope that I posted yesterday the doctor's criminal thinking errors. I posted them to both Facebook and X. I hope some of you had the opportunity to look at those, to go over them, because it'll help with following the discussion that we're now having. So the second thing that the doctors emphasized in their programming is reason over emotion. It's not what you need to think with your mind, not with your feelings, because remember, your feelings are just a product of the thinking that you've already done or failed to do. Your feelings are a function of what you happen to value, not necessarily of what is good for you, not necessarily of what is of value to you. So, I mean, if you're going to go by feelings, when I first started in the change process and I decided I was not going to be violent any longer, there were many times when people would say things to me, call me a pussy or whatever, where my initial impulse was to respond violently. When people would be jerks to me, I wanted to hurt them, but I had to use my reason to understand that those emotions I was having were not based on rational thought. They were based on values that I happened to pick up in the past while growing up from whatever source without thinking about them. So the doctors were at pains. This is something they took very seriously, was that criminals, you cannot deal with emotion when talking to criminals. You don't ask them, how does that make you feel? Right? It's entirely irrelevant. What is relevant is what you are thinking. And that's what they sought to do, is get criminals to use reason to attack their criminal thinking errors. Also, the doctors, the third one here, they wanted to inculcate healthy sense of guilt. They went so far. I mean, they would just tell these criminals how rotten they were, what terrible people they were, contrary to what they thought of themselves or what they have been told their whole lives about how wonderful they are and how they're just misunderstood. They're really good people. The doctors are like, no, screw that. You are a scumbag. Someone who does what you've done is a scumbag. You need to change your thinking. You need to feel good. I mean, you need to feel badly about what you have done in your life. You need to understand the repercussions of it, and you need to feel rotten about yourself, because the internal deterrent. So, just for some context, the doctors talked about two types of deterrence: external deterrence and internal deterrence. The external deterrents are things like the consequences of, you get arrested, you get fined, you do prison time, you might be ostracized socially, your family might turn their back on you, you lose friends. Those are external deterrents. But the doctors talked about that because of things like super optimism, where the criminal thinks he's always going to get away with the crime. They need to develop internal deterrence, need to develop conscience, need to develop guilt. And I tell you, the guilt feeling, I'm so afraid of guilt at this point in my life. I do not like that feeling. I've so developed my conscience to such a degree that the guilt will just rain on me when I do wrong. And I don't want that. Therefore, I do right. I mean, that's not the only reason. I shouldn't say therefore, but that is definitely a strong incentive. So Persephone asked me, how long did it take for that knee-jerk reaction to begin to go away? Um, I don't know, Persephone, that it will ever entirely go away. I don't know that. I mean, it was so strong and so built in me that I don't know if it will ever go away. It's certainly less than it once was. It doesn't always happen. It doesn't happen to the same degree or, as much. But I think it will probably always be there, which is why I have to use reason to counteract it. Right? That's what I need to do, is learn to counteract it. So that's what they do, is they want to make criminals feel guilty, not good. Next is confronting misbehaviors and thinking errors. So confrontation is an interesting thing because different people mean different things by it. Confrontation means when a criminal contradicts himself, you call him out on it. When a criminal is exhibiting the thinking errors that we're talking about, you call him out on it. When he's not doing his homework, you call him out on it. Over and over again, you have to confront the criminal with what he's doing wrong. You have to put it in his face, show the mirror to him. And, that's what you have to do. And, you know, Brent McCall served that role for me because I didn't have the programming to do that. I had Brent McCall to do that for me, to let me know when my thinking was rotten, when my behavior was going astray, when I was doing what I wasn't supposed to be doing. And I got to tell you, I miss that. And the reason I miss it is this, because Brent would pick up on minute things that I'd be doing that were indicative of broader patterns. And he would call me out on it because he understood. And the people that are my good friends now just don't know. There's no way they could know. They're not criminals themselves. So they would never understand. But Brent understood, and Brent would call me out constantly, constantly. Brent, he who is on the cup, he really played that role for me. I played it for him as well. And it really helped the rehabilitation process. The doctors also focused on and emphasized repetition. Remember where we talked about fragmentation and concrete thinking. Because of this, the criminal has to constantly be reminded over and over and over again. It has to be drilled into the criminal's head about what he's trying to do, what the goal is, what the principles are, what the thinking errors are, what the corrections are. Look at this. We have a great super sticker, 99 euro or 0.99 euros. I'm not sure how to say that. I'm sorry, no name, but no name E7. I'm just going to go with no name super sticker. Thank you so very much. The super stickers and the super chats are so appreciated. So appreciated. And yeah, so you need to drill this into the criminals' heads over and over and over again. It's so tedious, but it needs to be done. It needs to be done over and over again. So the last point that Brent and I gleaned from the doctor's framework was clarifying self-interest. Now, the objectivists in the audience will really appreciate this. Jenna Kleem, thank you so much for another super. I guess that's a super chat, $2. Thank you so much, Jenna. Very much appreciated. So, what do we mean by clarifying self-interest? This is key, right? Because criminals have a fool's notion of self-interest. For instance, and let me give you an example. So I just a broader philosophical example. I promise I won't go too in depth. So I asked on both Facebook and Twitter today, fundamentally, why is it wrong to initiate force against other people? And there were a lot of answers. Some were better than others, and some gave what I hold to be the right answer. And the right answer is it's wrong to initiate force against others because I don't do that anymore, no name, but because it's against my interest to do so. It is against your interest to initiate force against other people. Now, obviously, in a philosophical context, we would explain why, and you can go into depth and how it violates the virtues and the values of the objectivist ethics of egoism. I mean, I'm not going to do that here. I'm not going to give the overdetermined answer for why. I'm just going to say that fundamentally it's because it's against my interest to do so. Similarly, being a liar, it's against my interest. Stealing is against my interest. Criminals don't understand this. Criminals think because of super optimism that you can cheat reality, that you can get away with stealing, that you can get away with lying, that you can get away with using force against other people. They don't understand that these things are ultimately against their best interest. What's in their interest is to think rationally, to develop a powerful work ethic, to develop a purpose in their lives. These are the things that are in the criminal self-interest, but they don't understand that. So they have to be taught. And again, you have to remember repetition over and over and over and over again. It's simply not in my interest. I once thought it was in my interest. And, my friend Danny in the audience, I'm sure can relate. I thought it was in my interest to develop a reputation as a tough guy, as a gangster, somebody not to be trifled with. And I did develop that reputation, make no mistake. Um, I was feared. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. But what did it ultimately get me? Nothing. Got me 25 years in prison because the type of things that I had to do in order to get people to fear me ultimately cost me my freedom and landed me in prison. So it was not in my interest. I remember when I was selling drugs and I thought, oh, it's in my interest. I can make such quick money. I ultimately had a gun put in my face and I was robbed. And then I ended up getting arrested for it. And, I ended up with more charges. So it wasn't in my interest. But in order to clarify the self-interest, we have to go back to concrete thinking. Remember, we talked about that. Criminals need to be taught to think in terms of principles. They need to identify the principles that are necessary for their long-term self-interest. Now, what the doctors don't do, I mean, they talk about how their program is a moral program, and they do teach, granted, some things that are generally accepted as moral norms. You know what I mean? Things that are acceptable in society, but they don't put together a rational morality that they want to teach the criminals. Brett McCall and I thought ultimately that Ayn Rand's ethic of objectivism would be the way to go. Interestingly, now this is as an aside here, our original goal, Brent McCall and I wanted to write a book called Ayn Rand and the Rehabilitation of Criminals because we knew how much the principles of objectivism had helped us change our lives. So we wanted to write a book on it. We did a ton of research, and Brent, the way that when Brent and I write together, it's funny to say write together because I don't really do much of the writing. Brent and I would do an abundance of research, debating. I might write a rough draft of something, but Brent ultimately did the final draft writing, and then I would proofread, go over it. We'd argue some more, and we would they would keep going through this process. And one day, Brent came to me and says to me, he basically he ripped up the entire manuscript that we had been putting together, and he said, "I can't write this in good conscience because." The way that the prison system is currently set up, it's a deterrent to rehabilitation. It's not going to do us any good to write this book on Ayn Rand and the rehabilitation of criminals if we are not, if the prison system keeps putting blocks in front of that type of progress. And Brent asked me if I would write the book, co-author it with him, which became Down the Rabbit Hole: How the Culture of Corrections Encourages Crime. Now I knew, because what we were going to have to do was say things, for instance, like the prison system, the guards don't enforce the rules. They allow the inmates to get away with virtual murder in the blocks. They allow them to gamble, to swear, to make noise, to behave belligerently, to steal, things of that nature. And I knew that if Brent and I, once Brent and I wrote this book, I knew there would be inmates that were mad at us, and I knew there would be staff that would be mad at us. I knew there would be staff that would try to get the inmates to beat us up or worse. Brent and I also critiqued the state's good time law. So we were messing around with inmates getting out of prison early. And, when I say I was feared on the street, this is very true. I was also a stone cold coward. You may think those two things are contradictory. I assure you they are not, because I was a stone cold coward when it came to the possibility of me getting hurt. Then I was terrified, which, by the way, is one of the reasons I went to extreme ruthlessness in terms of using bats and guns, knives when I was into fighting, because I didn't want to fight with my hands. I get beat up. So I'm scared. Brent is not. Brent is a big guy. Brent is 6 feet, over 200 pounds. I'm 5'8", 175. You know what I mean? I'm not tough. And so when Brent asked me to write this book with him, I was terrified. I knew, you know what I mean, that there was a very real chance that somebody would harm me badly. And, I was talking to Brent about that, and I said, Brent, I love you. You're my best friend. If you think this is the right thing to do, I'm going to do it. I said, but I got to tell you, I am scared. And Brent, in one of the classic worst pep talks that's ever been given in the history of pep talks, says to me, Mikey, listen, the odds of dying from getting stabbed are very, very slim. I said, what the fuck kind of pep talk is that? I don't want to get stabbed. I don't care if the chances of dying are very slim or not. You know what I mean? I said, are you out of your mind, dude? And, we got a good laugh out of it. And, and Brent said, well, it's a very real possibility. And I said, of course it is. But Brent and I decided to write the book because we thought that it was important. And sure enough, I mean, staff tried to have me beaten up. They went around, they, in many cases, lied to inmates about what was in the book, trying to get them to harm us. In the meantime, Brent gave his word on behalf of both of us that we wouldn't tell any inmates what was in the book, because as a condition of allowing us to write the book, they insisted that Brent give his word that we would not share the book with the inmates. So while Brent and I while the staff was lying about what was in the book, trying to get us beat up, Brett and I had given our word that we wouldn't reveal it. Now, granted, once the staff started doing that, morally, I felt I was in a good place. I can tell anybody what's in this book now. I don't care. This is a two-way street. Your guys are trying to get me killed here. I could show anybody what's in the book, but I chose not to. The reason that I chose not to, and the reason Brent chose not to, was to prove a point. And the point was, it's the two convicts, the two criminals who are keeping their word despite the danger that they're in. We're keeping our word when the staff was not. And that was a very, 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 very important point. Now, I know I've gone a little astray, but we're talking about ethics here, and we're talking about criminal rehabilitation. And to me, this was the epitome of it. Brett and I were cellmates for 11 years. They ultimately transferred him out of the building. We were separated. My physical safety was put at risk. The staff were always making comments to me. That stopped, however, when Senator Len Suzio came to visit me to talk about the book. Once the staff understood that a senator had my back, all bets were off. They basically left me alone at that point. And, I love Senator Suzio for that. And interesting, Senator Suzio is a conservative and was a tough on crime senator. And, he ultimately spoke at my sentence reduction hearing, became a friend of mine, and he got me my break of being on the Todd Feinberg show. So once now I'm on the Todd Feinberg show, I've got the senator backing me up. Now I had a voice that the staff basically knew we have to leave him alone. We can't be screwing with him. Now, let me just tell you a story to basically show the unethical staff inside a prison. Now, this is relevant to criminal rehabilitation, and I'll tell you why. If you look up social bonding theory, for instance, by Travis Hirschai, it's the idea that in order for people to respect the society in which they live, they have to respect the rules. They have to respect the leaders. They can't see hypocrisy at every turn, because then people come to not respect the society in which they live. So if you're a criminal and you're in prison, for instance, and you see the staff behaving not much differently than you do, then the conclusion is, wait a second here. Everybody's a criminal. I just got caught. Why do I have to change? Because they're showing a very bad example. So on the day that Brent McCall gets transferred, that morning, Brent McCall gets dressed, goes to work at Industries, Prison Industries in the wood shop. Now, in the prison industries, there's hammers, there's sledgehammers, there's razor knives, there's screwdrivers, there's pipe clamps. In other words, there are a lot of things that can be used as weapons at Industries. So Brent was allowed to go to work. After work, Brent was allowed to walk back to the block, come in the cell, get his stuff, go take a shower, wash up, come back into the cell, and then he was called to the desk and told that he was being transferred. The reason given for his transfer was that he was in danger because we wrote the book. Right? Now just stop and think about something. When the Department of Corrections thinks somebody is in danger, they come with a squad. A whole lot of COs. They come and get them, and they extract them, and they put them in segregation. What they don't do is allow him to go to work in a place where there's a variety of instruments that can be used as weapons. They don't allow him to walk back to the block on his own. They don't allow him to shower, and they don't allow him to pack his own stuff for the transfer. And the other thing was, why would Brent have been in danger, but not me? They left me in that prison for another year. So it was just an instance of them lying, because they wanted Brent out of the prison. They didn't want Brent down at Industries. They didn't want a witness to their ongoing shenanigans that we wrote about in our book. Now, how do you suppose inmates perceive this, if they see this is how the staff act, and this has to go all the way up to the warden, mind you, if they see this is how the staff act, then what are they going to conclude? What are they going to think? Now, after they continued to try to get me beat up, I wrote to the I can't remember now. I think I wrote to the state's attorney general's office ultimately, and I said, "Look, you have staff." Because now let me back up. For a long time, none of the other inmates who were telling me what the staff was saying were willing to go on the record. They were, scared that there would be retaliation because they know that's what the staff does. So they wouldn't go on the record. And then one guy, my friend Daryl Harrell, he passed away, I believe, from COVID. And he came to me. Now, Daryl Harrell was in prison for double homicide. He's 6'3", 300 and some odd pounds. And a staff member lied to him and told him that we badmouthed him in the book. Thankfully, Daryl didn't believe it. You tell a 6'3", 300-pound double murderer that I'm badmouthing him in a book, the intent is clear. You're trying to get me hurt. And so Daryl came and told me, and I said, well, Daryl, I said, will you go on the record? Because nobody else will. And he said, of course I will. I said, Daryl, I'm going to write to the commissioner right now. He said, Mike, I'll go on the record. So I wrote to the commissioner. I wrote to everybody. I said, Daryl Harrell's willing to go on the record. The letter I got back was that the Department of Correction will do its own investigation. Really? They're going to investigate them themselves. Funny how when I was arrested, I didn't get to do my own investigation, but somehow the Department of Correction would do its own, and nothing ever came of it. They just didn't care. But my point is now, well, what do prisoners think when they see this occurring? They correctly conclude that the prison system is corrupt, and that validates them as good people. Everybody's like this. I got caught. Look at what these people do. Right? Look what they do. And so that's ultimately why, that's the very reason Brett and I wrote the book. And that, by the way, also is, just a huge challenge, excuse me, to anybody that ever wants to work with criminal offenders is the prison system itself. It is so counterproductive to the task of reforming offenders. Listen, if you want, you can get my book, Down the Rabbit Hole, How the Culture of Corrections Encourages Crime. You can see numerous interviews I've done on various platforms, including Ian Bick's Locked In podcast, Connecticut WVIT 30. I did an interview during COVID on how the staff was behaving during that. So there's an abundance of me speaking out. I also wrote an open letter on juvenile crime that was published. That's out there. If you just look up Liebowitz takes on juvenile crime, you'll find it. So there's a lot of information out there. And ultimately, the prison system needs to be reformed. That does not mean that we should not be trying to reform offenders. However, so take what I said yesterday, take what I've said today, and, put it together. And if you can advocate. If it's something that interests you, read more, go further. By the way, just to put this out there, that Leonard Peikoff, for the objectivists in the audience, actually gave lectures or interviews. I'm not really sure. Maybe Jim Valiant, if he's in the audience, can remind us. But Leonard Peikoff actually endorsed the system of criminal treatment put out by Dr. Stanton Saminow, which was such a thing for me when I heard that, because Brent McCall and I in prison noticed how the compatibility of the doctor's theory with objectivism. So to get out and listen to Leonard Peikoff talk about it and say the same thing was a huge win for me. I would say, Jenna Clean, that no, illegal behavior is not always criminal behavior. That's going to get into a distinction in law between malum in se and malum prohibitum, between things that are wrong by their nature as contrasted with things that are outlawed because of some sort of legislation. All right, listen, Thank you for the super chats. Thank you for the super stickers. Thank you so much for joining me here today for this discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from it. I know I have. I will see you tomorrow at the same time. Until then, take care of yourselves. Thank you.